In this demonstration, we're going to talk about the sub-report option within the form builder. This is going to be kind of expert level form building. So if you haven't watched the other tutorials for form building basic and form building advanced, I would highly recommend checking out those first, just so you're not completely lost whenever we dive in here. So we're actually going to be talking about the benefits of creating an extra form and then tying it back in another form as what we call a sub-report. And typically what we do is end up hiding these so that really, again, they have to fill it out in the parent report. So to hide it, very easy toggle, just check the box and then you can save the changes down here to make it hidden in the background. And then from the build out perspective on the edit side here, um, you can scroll down here and you can actually see we have this on a counter field here. And then we also have the details for that sub report on the settings to do the equipment check in and check out sub report. So when the sub reports become useful, if you do need to connect it to another form, one caveat I want to do point out is if they do have access to fill out the parent report, they will automatically get access to fill out the sub report as well. So even if you have that sub report locked down to where they can't view responses or edit responses, they will get that if they did have access to view and edit the original parent report as well. That just kind of comes in saying, hey, if you can fill out the parent report, any reports submitted in it are also going to show as well. So to back up a little bit here, I want to show when the sub-report becomes useful. So we do have a JSA very similar with those counter fields where every time we click the plus button, in this case, it's just a set number of fields that displays every single time. What ends up happening with the counter fields though is on the responses page, the only way now you could kind of see that counter field data is doing a search and exporting it into a spreadsheet from there. You kind of lose the ability to filter any of those fields. So now you can see, I really only could see the number of steps. I can't see those actual fields because they're actually grayed out and hidden and just kind of tagged in the background to display those set number of fields every time I click the plus up button. So that's where a sub-report can come into play and be very handy to kind of pull that data on screen instead of having to export it into Excel each time. If I need to see that data, I could create all those fields on a separate report and then attach that as a sub-report. So for example, I have this action item report. Also, another thing that happens with those counter fields is you lose the ability to do any what we call the visibility settings to say, hey, when I toggle this selection versus this selection, it's going to open up another selection based off of what I select above. Unfortunately, on those counter fields, again, you can't do that for each item or for those items because, again, once they're hidden, it grays them out and kind of considers them inactive, and you can't do the visibility settings. So an action item report is a great example where you could kind of tag that, especially if you want multiple fields to open up on an unsatisfactory item and kind of trigger a task with them to ask the severity and probability, display that risk assessment and that rank of medium risk, and then assign a task if they need to, attach a follow-up and sign off. That would be a lot of build out to create that for every single question. If you want an action item to kind of open up every time you fill out an inspection, you could have it set up to where now instead of having to build out every single one of those fields under each question to populate when unsatisfactory is selected, now you can just do that with the sub-report option and have this action item report going for that instead. So in that case, we'll just create a new field and we'll add that sub-report option. And then we'll just call this the action item report, or you could call it, a lot of times I like to call it details just because it's short and sweet. In this case, I'll call it the action item report. And then this is where we can set on the back end the settings, choose our report. We could say that's the action item. And then we can also toggle that visibility to say, hey, we only want to show this when the lights are unsatisfactory, and then they have to fill it in. May not be the best for like just a regular vehicle inspection, but if you had like a more robust audit, you could definitely use this and have an action item report kind of trigger every time. Another cool feature I'll show you is, let's say that every time that they're filling out the date and also selecting that equipment, you also want it to populate down into the action item report, but you don't want them to have to select it every time. There is a way that you could do that. So we'll go ahead and save our changes here first. And then we'll go back into our action item report. And then we're going to add those same fields in. And then the sub-report option allows us to do what's called presets. So that if a user is filling out the form every single time, so this one we'll call equipment. If the user is filling out the parent report, basically we can preset this to say every time they fill out the date and select the equipment in the parent report, we're automatically going to have it fill the sub-report as well, so that they don't have to select that option again. The main thing, as you see, the date fields and those fields have to match exactly so that they can make that connection from there. So now we could go back into our 360 report, which I'll just bring it up here so that we don't have to keep scrolling down. And we'll edit here. And then if we go to our first sub-report here, you can change that details here to add, or the settings, excuse me, to add a preset now. Again, if you don't see those fields, then that could mean that they're not, there's no connection between the two forms. It will also tell you sometimes too if you select something that's not there. So if we choose date here as the first field, it will say, hey, how do you want to connect that back? You can always choose a value now. So if it's ever just set as one thing, you can make it set as one thing. 9 times out of 10, though, you're going to refer to the parent field, saying, again, if they fill it out in the parent field, I don't want to make them fill it out again. I'm just going to go ahead and refer it back again to that date of the 360 walk around. And you'll see any other date time field in the field will pull up. So you'll just want to make sure you're making that connection back to the field you're wanting it to map back to. Or capture from, I should say, preset from. So now that's the first one. The second one would be equipment. And then again, you could select value now, but most likely you'll just refer to parent field. In this case, we only have one source that matches the same equipment field. So we'll select that, click save. And then really, again, those are the only presets we can do. So as you saw, whenever I was showing you the action item report, those fields are there. However, when I'm a user filling it out under the preview mode, they'll select their items. If they toggled unsat here, my action item report opens up. And now you can see, even though I have the equipment field in the actual form, the user actually won't see it. It acts like it's not even there. It still is there on the back end details so that you could still filter and sort by those details, but now allows them to kind of add that action accordingly from there. And then if you did have those presets and they were the same kind of across the board, you could duplicate this, and then you would just kind of have to save or change your visibility settings at that point. So we can duplicate, and then again, we can have the visibility, say, instead of lights, we're going to remove this setting. We're going to add that new condition here to say anytime the turn signals is unsat, then the action item report is going to populate accordingly from there. And then what that would give you over time, instead of going, if you wanted to kind of analyze the action items, if you didn't have that equipment field added into your action item report, what ends up happening is you would have no association with what report it came from without kind of looking at the parent and child relationship from there. So, for example, let me just go ahead and fill out a response so I could show you what I'm referring to here. Enter some, I want to trigger this here. And then I'll sign off here. And I'm not going to trigger a follow-up for now. And then again, we could create another one just so that I could show you the difference here of how the reporting is going to look like when we scroll down to submit here. So now again, if you were looking at the responses for the individual action items here, if we didn't have that equipment option, you wouldn't be able to filter by that date or equipment that they're selecting in the form without doing that preset. At that point, you would only have hazard severity, probability, risk assessment ratings on high, medium, and low from there. And then you could see, again, you get that analytical detail as a whole, where I now can filter and see any action items that ever happen on equipment vehicle sample 1. And if I did toggle that, I would know that. Let me see. I don't know which one I originally toggled it to, so we'll look here. There we go. So now we got 2 responses of all of those, action items that ever happened for the last 7 days for sample vehicle 2. So it just gives you that nice gauge to see where that's at over time. And then also, like I said, where if they didn't have that link where they can see it, is there is this nice parent report link view option where you can toggle back and forth between the parent and child view. So if I click into this, I can see the parent report here, scroll down, and again, it looks like the date and equipment are on the action item report, but when I click into the view of the individual report, that is where I get to see those presets again to allow me to filter those items that I need to and preset them where the user isn't having to fill them in twice. Where this also comes into great play for the presets is also in the our incident investigation report is also kind of set up to preset back to some of the OSHA fields in the OSHA module for the OSHA case if it's an OSHA recordable. So for example, you could obviously toggle the first report of incident, and then we could set up that workflow. If you haven't watched a workflow video, kind of walks through that process. But if you needed to, again, you could toggle that investigation to management, and then they could have presets in here where they're filling out the date of the incident and injury details, and then it automatically trickles in to the OSHA case module where they only fill in the details they need to from there. So from here actually looks like the bottom of the incident details. So if we needed to kind of add that in, we would just add a new field below again. Choose our sub-report option here. Type in that title again. So if I wanted to call this the OSHA case details. Also, there is actually a toggle up here to say, is it recordable or not? So if we needed to, we could toggle that visibility in here to say if it's only yes, it's going to show this sub-report. And then very similarly, we would just choose again that OSHA recordable incident form from your site. And then we would add our presets. So this is where it becomes a little bit tedious because now you got to kind of cross-reference everything. So usually I start with, completed by, I don't know if we have a completed by field, but we'll see, we do. So you kind of cross-reference that and then make that a preset. Their job title is probably the first job title, but you might confirm they will fall in order of how they are on the form. So if actually, in that case, it would be that's the employee's job title. So the completed by job title is probably actually that second one down at the bottom. So that's a way to verify if you're connecting the right one. So also naming convention kind of can be important there too, so that you're making sure that you're connecting the right job title. So you can say, completed by person's job title or employee involved job title on your main form. And then that way you get, you know for sure you're connecting the right one. So you'll save changes there and then so forth. So date of injury, refer to parent field, date of incident, just called a little bit different, but again, you can still make that connection as long as they're the same field types. So even if the nomenclature is a little bit different, you could still make that connection. So again, field office might be called our location here, and so forth. So you just build out all the presets from there of items you want to connect, and then again doesn't make the user refill them out. Again, as a note and a reminder that if they have access to fill out the parent report, they will also see that sub-report as well. So we would just save our changes, and really that would be kind of the connection from there, where if they toggle an injury here, now they get this option to say, is it recordable, yes or no? And then now I get to enter the OSHA case details accordingly. From there, you can see actually normally location or field office normally sits right here, but it doesn't show right now. And actually the completed by and the job title is at the top and no longer shows to the user again because we preset those items from there. I do want to show one little more final complicated option when you're building out a large audit with large questions. And again, you want to kind of toggle an action item report, but you want to know what section and question it falls under. And then gives you a graph over time of those areas being hit. So for example, maybe this one isn't a good one, but let me see if I can find one here. Maybe an aerial lift. That's an evaluation. Okay, so we're going to make up our own sections then. So let's say that there are sections in the form and they're doing an audit on maybe, a site inspection. That's probably a good item. So PPE, maybe walking surfaces, walking and working surfaces, equipment, just to kind of name a few. And then let's say we have questions for those. So we'll say this is a PPE question. And then we'll say walking and working. And then equipment. And then now we'll kind of build out a little quick audit form. All right, so we're going to say this is a select field for the PPE. We'll do the settings of just pass fail for now. I'm not going to worry about color coding or scoring, but normally would set that up for red, green. So this is PPE 2. And then we'll create just a couple more just so we could show you here. Equipment. Equipment 2, and then we'll just do one for walking, working. All right. And then we'll create our section headings. So PPE, equipment, so again, kind of just building out what section it falls under and then the actual questions. So now what this allows is on the sub-report, and this is, again, getting kind of advanced, but let's say we want to trigger that action item every single time that audit is filled out. So I'm going to, again, pull this all the way to the top. And then I'm also going to bring my action items up here. And then I'm going to edit my action item to add in those data list items now. So I'm going to add a field above, and I'm going to create that select field for the section that it falls under. And then we'll tie that back under the settings to the data list here for my sections. Perfect. And then we'll do the same thing for the question. So now that that's in there, again, the presets come into play. But in this case, we're actually going to select the value. So this is where the select value can come into play. So again, let's just say we want that action item report to toggle every single time they select fail. So again, we can toggle our sub-report here to the action items, and then we can add that preset to say this section select value now is always PPE. So we have the section saying, hey, this one is PPE. And then now for the question, again, we select the value and say this is PPE question 1. Obviously, those would be your real sections and question titles that you just load into a data list. And then we could duplicate this for a couple more here. Oops. All right. Now, the only thing with duplication, of course, is on these presets now, since we selected the value, we do have to fix the question. The section would change only when you're moving sections if you needed that data. Otherwise, you could just load your questions and toggle the question. And then over time, you're going to gauge what sections and questions are getting most hit with fail action items over time this way. So I will fill out a few reports because I want to show you exactly what that will look like. And then let me toggle these ones as well. So, which these are all going to, okay, we don't have them. Visibility, perfect, okay. So on these ones, this would be section for select value now for equipment. And this becomes question 1 for equipment here. So that's all I'll do for now. Let me remove that one, and then we'll save these changes because I want to run a sub-report real quick. So if we had that action item here, you can see now it doesn't even show me those options. And I can submit here, and then we'll go ahead and say, obviously you'd probably only want this to toggle when they click fail so that you knew that these were only failed items accordingly from there. And then we can, again, create that last action item here and then submit this. And then instead of going to the actual audit form responses, which you can always do and see them on that individual basis, but you could go into your action items now, and now I can see which section and which questions, again, are being hit over time with those failed items. So now, again, I could see the individual details of those, or I could even click into the graphs here. Let me get rid of that filter and see, okay, now PPE is getting hit a lot. What's getting hit a lot in PPE? So let's go dive into the questions here and see which individual questions are getting hit the most from there. One last useful option that can be used for sub-reports is the forms to training mapping, and then the equipment forms to equipment mapping. And that is because if you need it to kind of tie back to equipment or an employee profile, it basically needs to be one select field for the equipment or employee per form. So this last example here kind of is set up for that. This is also in our library, the equipment check-in and check-out. It automatically won't create the mapping for you under your equipment type. So that is the last step you'd have to do if you clone it over. But what it does allow it to do is, again, have those presets to say every time it's checked in or out, we're going to toggle the location, department, employee signed, and then now whenever they're filling out the form, they only toggle the piece of equipment. It will automatically map back to the equipment profile accordingly from there, but allows you to do multiple and allow you to map those back properly. If you did set it up on a counter field or even just one form with multiple pieces of equipment or employees being selected, unfortunately, it doesn't map back properly. So you do have to kind of set up a counter field if you don't want them to do like a single submission for each item, especially if they're kind of assigning out just, multiple pieces of equipment really quickly. You could kind of have them set up this way with a sub report. And then again, same back end details where all of this stuff is still housed on the sub report, but instead of going to this form responses button, you would go to the sub report form responses button now to see the status, if it was checked in or out, the location, department assigned, equipment, and so forth over time of all those actions being assigned out to those checked in and checked out pieces of equipment. Of course, if you have any questions on subreports or anything KPA EHS related, feel free to reach out to our support team at support@kpaehs.com.